And I always wondered what sanctification was. Well, listen, we're starting on sanctification on Wednesday nights. And if you've ever struggled in your life with sin after you are saved, sanctification is a really big deal to you, okay? I would encourage you to come for a little while. You're going to learn something about yourself. You're going to learn something about what Jesus might have actually been doing. You're going to learn how imperfect we still are. All right, even as sinners, it's been saved. We still are imperfect in many ways. But sanctification has a lot to do with what Jesus is doing with you, okay, after the moment of being saved. And we're going to get started on that. So I encourage you to come and be here on Wednesday nights and to start as we start the beginnings of that. We've been studying the book of Romans, and we've gotten through the first 5 chapters. But starting chapter 6 is going to be about sanctification. So y'all try to make it for that. Stephanie, since you shared with me that you used to babysit the boys, you do realize the twins turned 40 years old this year. That means what? Nick's 43, 44, something like that. So I can't never remember on Nick's, but I remember the twins because they're too near tax day. But Luke, that chapter 15, this is a parable of a lost son. Now, it's a great story about how this child who had everything at his disposal, who had everything that would give him life, who had everything. He had a good life. He didn't have a bad life. He had a good life. And he gave that all up to go and have a good time. And he figured out some things along the way, and then he come back. We're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. We're going to be at verse 11. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided into them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into the far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he had come to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to the servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put the ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Tiny, if you would, lead us in a word of prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for a wonderful day. Thank you for all the people gathered to worship you, to understand your words. Please forgive us where we have failed you. Please help the ones in need, which we all need you, Lord. Please lift up all the people on our prayer list to you.
Yes, Lord.
Help them, encourage them to gather with us on Sundays and Wednesdays. And in
Amen. You know, talk about that prodigal son. I had a brother, an older brother. He was in the Army, still in the Army. He's been serving now 41 years in the service. And so he's been doing it a long time. But every time that booger come home and he got anywhere near my mother's house, my mother would feed him like royalty. And so naturally, me and my younger brother started calling him the prodigal son because of that. And we one time asked Mama, why is it that we can never get a meal around here anymore when we come around? But every time he shows up, there seems to be plenty of food around and a lot of good food around. And it tastes like when we was younger. And she says, well, I'll tell you why, because he's not here all the time. And y'all get a whole lot more meals than he gets, you know. But I said, well, you know, I was just wondering about that. One time me and Robin we was having a discussion. You know how wives and husbands get in discussions where you just know you should just keep your mouth shut and just whatever, you know. You don't want to say whatever. You don't want to say, I don't think that way or nothing else. So anyway, one time me and Robin was riding and we got in this discussion and she started to say to me at that point, she said, I've been trying for 2 years. It seems like an eternity, but I know it's been for the last 2 years. She said, I've been trying for 2 years now for you to get done with that project that we were supposedly doing together. And she says, I don't know what else to do. I said, well, I tell you, I wouldn't worry too much about that because I've been trying for 10 years to get a boat out of you, and I ain't got no boat yet either. And I thought I'd turn the tables on her, you know, and got to the point there. But she was trying to tell me, hey, it's time we finish this. I was thinking there was a lot more projects that she wasn't thinking about that I was thinking about. I think in a lot of ways we were both kind of being a little bit selfish at that moment in the way we talked and the way we were dealing with those things. This is what I began to realize the longer I stayed in relationship with Robin. It's this. Really, to gain things or for things to be finished or for things to come to the point that God can help in any singular way, okay? For you to ever get to that point, the thing has to be important enough both to you and to your significant other, or it probably is not going to get done. You see, God has a lot of things that's important to him as far as our lives is concerned. God knows there's a lot of things that we probably need to be working on a lot more than we're working on it right now. God knows this. But often, we're not knowing this, okay? We're not on the same page. It's hard to change when you don't feel there's a need to change. That's just life in general. I mentioned my Grandma Cooper many times. And my Grandma Cooper really only had one rule in life for her 5 children and their significant others and all the grandkids. And there were 16 grandkids involved in that. She could care less about there's way hundreds of days in the year, but the only time she cared about anything was Easter, and you were basically commanded to be at her house at Easter and enjoy Easter at her house. Now, that little house was a little, I tell you, this is not joking at all. That little house was a quarter of the size of this sanctuary that she raised 5 children in and lived life, good life, had good life. Of course, my grandfather died when they were all young, so she raised them alone. But she wanted every one of us to come to that little tiny place. Now, many of them already had homes, much bigger homes where we could have it at. No, that wasn't good enough. She wanted them at that home. that had nothing but that little tiny place to put 15 grandkids, 10 mamas and daddies, and herself in, and spend the entire day. There wasn't no place to sit. There was just a little old table in the kitchen, and it was a tiny kitchen. Had a well outside. It had an outhouse, which my cousins were from mostly Houston, never had seen an outhouse in their entire lives. But yet it had a little outhouse out back, but it was commanded you be there, and you were there, or you were disowned in many ways. I never remember anybody missing that event as all the days that she lived, all the way until 1982. They came, and they were there because it was important to her, and it was important for them to remember where they came from and what might be going on in regards to that. She was a fine lady in regards to those things. I'm sure she heard from time to time that there might be a better way of doing this. I'm sure she heard from time to time that they probably would rather be doing something else than having to drive all the way from Houston back to Jasper and then all the way back to Houston in the afternoon just to spend time with her on that one day. I'm sure she heard it. It didn't mean nothing to her, but I'm sure she heard those things. In fact, many probably felt no need at all to come at that time. But it was important, wasn't it? Well, I think in regards to her story, in regards to our own Christian story, in regards to the prodigal story, they all start in the same way. Selfishness drives us from God. And being selfish drives us from God. You see, there's a lot of things happening in this story, a lot of things that are happening within the people of this story. There's a phrase that is written upon the doors of every synagogue that you walk into. I don't know if you've ever been to a synagogue, but there's a phrase that's written in real small letters, usually on a little wooden plank, of every synagogue that you walk into. And it says these words: know whom before you stand. Know whom before you stand. In other words, it's kind of like a warning to them as they enter into the synagogue, and it's this: be careful, because you're fixing to stand before the Almighty God. All right? And it's important for them to be remembered of that and know those things. Some say of today's times, and I've heard this a lot lately, but some say of today's times, I was just talking to the kids earlier about these very things, that maybe these times are the end times. Some say that in today's times, there seems to be a real hate for God. When I was a kid, it seemed like even if you didn't know God, at least there was respect for God. It wasn't like nobody willing to go out there, and it's more like people knew who God was, and they weren't willing to make him not on their side. In today's times, it's almost like you need to make a stand on what you believe, and if you hate God, say you hate God. And it seems like there's a more willingness today to say, I don't need God, or I even hate God. I don't believe that at all, actually. I really don't. And this is why. First of all, I believe if they really knew God, there's no way they could hate God. If they really knew who he was, if they really knew what he was doing, if they really understood how much he loved them, if they really understood how much he loved them and yet they were sinners, if they really understood how much he still loves them even though they fail him often in life, if they really understood what he could possibly do in their life, and can do in their life, there's no way possible that they actually could hate God. Now, they might disagree with him. They might even say, I still don't know him, but I don't think they'd go and say that God does not love me. Because God is loving. God's always loving. God is always doing. So in today's times, I would say it's more like this. Either we've done a terrible job of getting people to know the real God, or people are being led astray into thinking there's something better out there. To me, the prodigal son was a lot like the cows in the springtime. The cows in the springtime, they'll eat all the grass on their side, but there's something about that taller green grass right outside that fence that makes every cow in East Texas want to go out to where it's at and get out of the pen somehow and eat that grass out there. The prodigal had everything that he needed. He had more than enough to survive and to be happy and to be confident about what he thought and believed each and every moment in his life. He had everything at his disposal, yet there was something inside of him. There's surely something out there greater than this. I got to thinking about in today's times, if it's not the case, then what is the truth about nowadays? Well, in a nutshell, I think this, that people think that they do not really have a need for God because of the sufficiencies of life. Listen, I tell people all the time, I've never been afraid of poor. I've never been afraid of poor. We were poor when we were young. Listen, I spent my days at that Cooper household with absolutely nothing to eat. If you got something to drink, it was usually that Seaport coffee that was like syrup that you could actually turn a spoon in it, that it'd be on the end of the spoon. She'd feed it those things. But I've never drank coffee again since I was a child, by the way. Even the smell of coffee makes me turn away from it. We were poor. We didn't have much. She lived off the commodities, and then she kept us a lot of the time because my parents worked. But we didn't have much. That outhouse was like 100 yards behind the house, and it was a miserable walk in a rainstorm. You needed to go somewhere. That's a terrible thing. I used to bathe in the same number 5 wash tub as my girl cousins. There was about 19, I don't know, there's 5 or 6 of those. They'd all get their baths first, and then us boys would get our baths in the same water right after that. That water would start out the perfect well water that come out of that well that we'd have to haul in by the bucket. We'd get it in there, get it all filled, and by the time them girls was finished, the stuff was milky white, just like it turned white like milk. They'd scrub so much. And then you were asked to jump in that same filth. People talk about you talk about the difference between the Shire people and people. I think it made me a Shire person for the rest of my life. I just remember not having much. I remember not having anything. There was no Coke around. There was none of those things around. It was a little and a whole lot of rice with a whole lot of gravy over it because she was in a lot of ways. And I remember those type of things. I remember beans. I don't want to see another bean as long as I live. Some pinto beans as long as I live. I ate pinto beans all the time as a child. But let me tell you what it done for me was made me understand we are spoiled rotten as people today. We have everything at the tips of our fingers. We can have things. You don't see much of that poorness is hidden now. It wasn't like it was. Everybody was poor. It's kind of like my grandpa said about the Depression. Oh, nobody was bothered by the Depression. I said, really? I said, I hear people say it was terrible. He said, we were all in the same boat. It was like the Depression was just like another aspect of being poor. It wasn't have nothing to do with anything else. He said, yeah, there was a few extra things you didn't have here and there. The sufficiencies of life, it's actually made it harder to know God. Because we are in such excess at this point of time in history, because man has so much at this time in history, it's really difficult for man to want to know God and to have God in their lives because they don't see the need for it. Okay? And I'm not talking about in an aspect of having or doing or having more and doing, because there's a whole lot of prosperity preachers out there today says, come to know God. He'll make you richer. He'll make you have more. He'll make you have this and have that. That's not the Bible I read. What Jesus said in the Bible that I read, he says, I turned you out to the wolves. It's not roses out there. It's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of suffering that goes on with that. There's a lot of things that happen to us as Christians that kind of goes against some of that. You see, you really cannot feel you need something until you feel you need something. Okay? Right? That's for any of us. Last night, I had I was just dreaming of something that's sweet to eat. And I had a box of fudge over there on the countertop that me and Ella was going to make one night, and I made it. I looked at the box, and I got to thinking about how much effort it was going to be to do that, and I got to thinking, I'm not really that hungry. Because that's going to take an hour, and then I'd have to smell it for an hour, and then it'd be like 10 o'clock, and eating fudge at 10 o'clock is probably not the best thing for my health or for life in general. So I kind of got over it. Because listen, until you really feel you need something, usually it don't get accomplished. Okay? That's true of all things of life. Here's what I find to be true of us all. No person ever seeks God. No person neither longs for God as long as we feel we are already sufficient. That's truth. Truth. I made no qualms about the fact that sometimes Robin knew it of me, other people know it of me. Ella even sometimes will say, he just needs to be by himself for a while. To her more or less, and she'll start saying, no, I'll just leave him alone for a while. He'll get over that. He still needs me. That's the way her mind works. Ella's mind works like, he still needs me. He just don't know it yet. But anyway, even she knows it. And even still to this day, I just get sometimes, I just want some peace and quiet. I want some Jeff time. I want to go over to that area where I'm not bothered with others. And I tell you, I say that about myself often because I want people to understand I'm not trying to be offish. I'm not trying to be away from people. I'm not trying to keep away from people in regards to my life. I'm just that way with others often. I figure out at some point in life I thought to myself, I said, it's probably better. Listen, if you're ever a pastor, trust me, when you're a pastor, pastors tend to get in a lot of trouble with the people sometimes. Sometimes when you have to deal with people, pastor's probably not the one you want to see on the front porch. Pastor's not the one that you want to see in your life at that moment. In fact, sometimes you just rather he just go somewhere else. And often will tell pastor, go somewhere else. I've been to go help people, and they flat out tell me, this ain't probably the time you need to visit me. My own brother one time said to me once, he said, I liked you much better as brother than I do as pastor. That's what he told me. He said, listen, it's hard being pastor sometimes, but I kind of got to figuring it out one day in my own mind. You know, Jeff fixes his problems so much better than God can fix his problems. And I got to figuring out one day, I said, well, there's a whole lot better chance of me not goofing something up if I just don't participate. There's probably a whole lot better chance of me not disgusting somebody if I'm only talking to myself. There's probably a better chance of no hurt feelings if when I say something, the only person in the room is me. I got to thinking about that, and I said, you know what? Any advice I'd give to myself probably ain't going to bother me as much as it sometimes bothers others when I give them advice. So I can say whatever I want to in advice, and as long as I'm the only person in the room, guess what? It's probably going to be okay. Jeff's going to agree with everything that Jeff's got to say because he ain't got no problems with Jeff. It's said of the prodigal, this is what it said of the prodigal. It's first he decided to manage his own life. Decided to manage his own life. Second thing it said of the prodigal, he began to be and want after he managed his life. Okay? And then the third thing that it said of the prodigal, after he began to be in want, after he listened to his own self. Thirdly, it says he came to himself. He came to himself. He figured out something along the way. Only one problem with self that I see in life today and in people in general in today. Only one problem with self. Life would be so much simpler. This is truth. Life would seem so much simpler if we were single self, where nobody else was involved, right? I mean, put yourself in a room, deal with yourself all day long, never having to deal with others, never having to deal with anything that might be wrong, never having to deal with anything of want because you're sufficient, you got everything you need. It seems like that simple being single self is probably the best way. That's what the prodigal thought. He thought that single self is probably the best way to go. But we're not single selves, are we? Are we single selves? You can take the most remotest person on earth, and I guarantee you there's somebody else on earth that either knows about him or cares about him or her, and they the same. They just ain't willing to say it. None of us are single selves. For instance, I have a lot of many selves, okay? I realize in my lifetime that I've got a lot of many selves, single selves, Jeffs, that don't like to be bothered with other things in life. I have a careless self, okay? Brother Jeff has a careless self, which he's kind of careless in that he drifts along with any thinking, without any thinking, or without any trying. When I'm by myself like that and I'm thinking only of myself, I don't want to try nothing new. What I'm going to want to try is the things I like to do, like watch westerns on TV without people bothering me. Like sitting there on the couch, turning off the phone and forgetting about anything else that might be happening in life and just enjoy the single self of Jeff. But there's no movement because single self is perfectly all right with who they are. They're never going to ask for help in regards to the things without looking at themselves to find out what might be in help. I have a passionate self side, okay? I have a very passionate self side. It tends to be my troublemaker side. I'll be honest with you. It tends to be that side that usually falls into anger, okay? I'm fast to anger. It usually makes me to lust after things that one time I remember Robin even telling me, she heard all this time, I just wanted to vote. It was a big joke between me and her, so finally she bought this little picture. And on the top, it said, bottom it said fur coat, And when you drop the quarter in, it went on the bottom. She was trying to remind me, hey, buddy, there's more people in this house than you. It's my lustful self that says I got to have those this or that. And it also, my passionate self, usually is that self that fears, okay, or has me to fear things that I do not understand and do not know. Then there's my greedy self. I have that selfish self, I have that passionate self, and I have a greedy self. I find my greedy self is kind of like a love killer in a lot of ways. The only way to truly get to know God designed the gospel to be carried around this world by relationships, not by self. God intended for the gospel of Christ to be known and to experience and to be had by those that are willing to share with others through relationships. You can't be selfish about those things. But I have a greedy self. I find it to be my greedy self to be that one that kills love often, that kills relationships. When I would start to do something, my greedy self often kills it or keeps it from happening. There's a lot of things we do each and every day with greedy self. But God says there's also the best self. Know that there's a best self in the Bible? God says there's a best self in the Bible. Scripture says it like this: to thy own self be true. To thy own self be true. Me and Robin were doing our taxes once. I can't remember what it was. It was doing our taxes, and it was the year that one of our grandchildren passed away at 2 months from SIDS. And what it is, I have my journal, and I keep a journal each and every day of the things I do, so that when tax season comes around, I can say, I went and visited this person or visited that person, then I can take my gas expense off of my taxes at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, I read everything that I do. Them journals are long, by the way. That takes me like about 2 weeks to read through everything that I did for the year and write everything down as far as mileage reports are concerned, just so I can get a tiny little break from the government on gas. But anyway, we was going through, and at some point I got up to the point that our grandchild had passed away. And I was reading it through it, and of course, I've been upset. And we got thinking about that those things were happening. And I said in that journal at that point, we need God to come and help us, because it was hard to understand what God might have been doing. And I thought that's true of life. I never once, I had people in our family that lost kids to SIDS. I had done funerals of kids that had been lost to SIDS. I never once thought about how much those people needed God at that very moment to explain away to them what they were feeling at that moment. It was the need that drove my need. So I need God. And we don't even think about that often. We never think about it when we read the prodigal son. We don't think about that as, but it says very after he went and did the things that he did, he began to be in want, not want to be Father, but a want to be back to where he used to be in regards to those things. I find that Solomon was right about life. All of life is vanity without God. All of life is nothing without God. All of life is worthless without God. Here's what is true of life. No person really is ever their best selves by themselves. We're only our best self when we have God in our life. We're only our best self when we have relationship with God in our life. It is said of the prodigal that he came to himself and said, I will arise and go to my father. That's what he said. I will arise and go to my father. Our relationship with God is one out of love. Did you know that? And this is one thing that my parents, my grandparents, and every Christian, I'm pretty sure every Christian I've ever known in my life, has taught me. And it's this: love cannot and will never, true love can never be forced. It's never forced. True love is never forced. Okay? The only thing true love can be is compelled to be true to itself. Compelled to be true to itself. One thing for the prodigal to realize that he had lost that he had a need for that he should have never lost that. How many times, how many times in our life after we become saved do we say to ourselves, I wished I hadn't have done that. I wished I hadn't done what I did because it is not what is true within me. And how many times have we remained with that? Here's an idea. It's just an idea. Return to what you've lost. Return back to the God that you know that loves you. Return back to the God that can fix anything in your life. Return back to the God that will distinguish himself and how much he loves you within yourself. And you'll find life again. To come back to God's love. The psalmist writes, blessed is he whose transgressions is forgiven, and whose sin is covered. What a blessing to know that. You know, I got to think about the prodigal. He'd been out there eating with the swine, eating with the husk of the swine, and he went from eating with the husk of the swine and living in all that filth to having the finest of robes put back on him and fellowship completely restored to the one that he truly loved and should have never left in the first place. How should we think that it's not going to be the same for us? The only thing that keeps us from seeing what God is and what God can do in our lives is because and we think we have the answer. And we think that we can find the answers to these things that we're looking for. We continue to live in the destruction of our own self. We still tend to live in the destruction of what the world says we ought to be in self. But in reality, we know this to be true. We will be nothing outside of God. We can be nothing outside of Christ. We will be nothing outside of Christ. We need Christ. We need God to show us once again we need Christ. We need God to fill our lives with the hope of what we've lost and what we can gain again.